partners at the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State how the respective agencies are in good faith, and I stress the term good faith, re-implementing the margin protection protocols in the numbers shown as numbers above show otherwise. Not only is the surge of migrants at the border putting a strain on Border Patrol agents, but on local law enforcement and community resources as well. The number of border crossings has reached a shocking level. For example, border encounters in Yuma, Arizona went up by more than 2,000% since 2020. This is why fully re-implementing the Remain in Mexico policy is critical to stemming the flow of illegal crossings and will allow Customs and Border Protection to regain operational control of our southern border. Again, I'm not here to cast aspersion on anyone, but it strains the imagination to think that if this margin protection protocols were being re-implemented as the court ordered, there'd be a hell of a lot more than less than 1% of the individuals being put in MPP protocols. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And if I have to get off this early, I trust that the ranking member can pursue this area for me with vigor. And with that, I yield back. And thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to thank the full committee's ranking member. And I want to make sure that members are reminded that the subcommittee will operate according to the guidelines laid out by the chairman and the ranking member in their February 3rd, 2021 colloquy. And now I would like to take the opportunity to welcome our first panel of witnesses. Mr. Blas Nunez Neto is Acting Assistant Secretary for Border and Immigration Policy at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Benjamin Carey Huffman is the Acting Chief Operating Officer at U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Ms. Emily Mindrala is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Without objection, the witnesses' full statements will be inserted in the record. I now ask each witness to summarize his or her statement for 5 minutes, beginning with Mr. Nunez Neto.
Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Higgins, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the court-ordered re-implementation of the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. I'd like to begin by noting that Secretary Mayorkas has made clear that MPP is not aligned with this administration's values, imposes an unjustifiable human cost on migrants, and pulls resources away from more important efforts that seek to address the root causes of irregular migration and comprehensively manage irregular migratory flows at our border. Despite this, and consistent with our support for the rule of law, DHS has moved forward expeditiously with the court-ordered re-implementation of this program. As of this week, MPP returns are now occurring in 4 locations across the entire southwest border. We also continue to expand enrollment numbers despite dealing with the unprecedented global COVID-19 pandemic that has impacted operations on both sides of the border. As part of the court-ordered re-implementation of MPP, we have made a number of changes that attempt to address the grave humanitarian concerns associated with the previous implementation, concerns shared by this administration and the government of Mexico. First, DHS is committed to excluding particularly vulnerable individuals from being put in harm's way. This includes individuals with known mental and physical health issues, disabilities, or advanced age, among other factors. Second, we have enhanced the policies and procedures that protect individuals from being returned to Mexico who fear facing torture or persecution there. CBP personnel now affirmatively ask enrollees about their fear of being returned to Mexico, something that brings this process more in line with international norms. We have also lowered the screening standard for individuals who express a fear of persecution or torture in Mexico. Third, DHS and DOJ are committed to providing individuals subject to MPP with reasonable and meaningful opportunities to access legal services. This includes providing them with 24 hours to speak to a legal representative before undergoing a non-refoulement interview, and also facilitating access to legal orientation programs and counsel before they attend their court hearings. Fourth, we are working to ensure that individuals enrolled in MPP receive a ruling on their cases to the greatest extent possible within 180 days to minimize the time they spend in Mexico. Fifth, as my Department of State colleague will explain, we have worked closely with the government of Mexico and international organizations to enhance the safety and security of individuals returned to Mexico. And sixth, we have created a case review process for individuals who believe they clearly should not be subject to MPP. I want to be exceptionally clear, however, that this administration recognizes these changes, while significant, are not sufficient to address the concerns we have identified with the program, and we will continue to fight the court's ruling. As Secretary Mayorkas noted in his second termination memo, there is no version of MPP that can fully address the inherent flaws of the program and the human costs it imposes on migrants who may have legitimate claims to protection in the United States. DHS will continuously evaluate MPP's operations and effectiveness and make adjustments as needed as we comply with the court order. We are also committed to transparency and have been publishing a detailed monthly report on MPP operations. Lastly, as the Biden-Harris administration and Secretary Mayorkas have repeatedly acknowledged, the U.S. is a nation with borders and laws that must be enforced, and it is also a nation that was built by immigrants. This administration is, as a result, committed to securing our borders while also offering protection to those fleeing persecution and torture. That said, our efforts to address irregular migration cannot solely be focused on our borders. Our immigration laws have not been updated in decades, and during this time, we have seen a dramatic change in the nature and magnitude of migratory flows. These changes have only accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are committed to working with Congress to transform our flawed and outdated immigration system so that we can both better secure our borders and create fair, orderly, and humane pathways for migrants seeking protection or opportunity in the United States. Thank you, and I look forward to answering whatever questions the committee may have.
Thank you for your testimony. I now recognize Mr. Huffman to summarize his statement for 5 minutes. Mr. Huffman?
Thank you. And good afternoon, Chairwoman Badagon, Ranking Member Higgins, Ranking Member Katko, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to testify today on behalf of U.S. Customs and Border Protection and discuss CBP's role in the implementation of the Migrant Protection Protocol Program, or MPP, across our southern border. I currently serve as CBP's Acting Chief Operating Officer. While I'm new to this role, my career in border security has spanned 37 years, and it's fair to say it's been a career that has taken me across our hemisphere conducting this line of business. To that end, the border has always been a dynamic environment, but there's one constant I'm reminded of every day. The men and women of CBP have a complex, important, and frequently dangerous mission. It is a mission we're called up to perform with the spirit of vigilance, service, integrity, and honor. I am honored to serve on the leadership team of one of the nation's premier law enforcement agencies. And due to the challenges we face today, it is also the most humanitarian law enforcement agency in the country, possibly the world. I'd like to point out that since the beginning of 2021, CBP has performed over 13,000 life-saving rescues in sometimes extremely dangerous conditions, and spent hundreds of millions of dollars providing medical support and provided care for over 146,000 unaccompanied children, our most vulnerable migrant population. These are just a few examples of the care and compassion that define CBP's values of vigilance, service, integrity, and honor. In regards to MPP, our primary responsibility involves enrollment of individuals and facilitating them through the ports of entry prior to and following their hearings. CBP's operational framework is grounded by 3 key principles essential to our mission. First, enforce the law and implement policy. Second, ensure individuals in our custody are provided care and afforded rights. And third, work collaboratively with our interagency and international partners. First, CBP is a law enforcement organization. We are committed to enforcing our nation's law and implementing the policies of the executive branch. I personally have worked under 7 administrations, and while strategies change, there has always been a commitment to enforcing the rule of law. To that end, CBP carries out its responsibilities in accordance with the U.S. laws and the DHS MPP policy guidance. CBP officers and Border Patrol agents determine whether an encounter or apprehended individual should be processed under MPP or under other procedures such as expedited removal. These determinations are made on a case-by-case basis and with the appropriate supervisor review. Trust in the rule of law is a pillar of our nation, and CBP is committed to faithfully executing its responsibility. Which brings me to my second point, which is commitment to providing care and communicating afforded rights to individuals throughout the entire MPP process. During an MPP determination, CBP procedures are designed to identify the correct processing pathway for every migrant as soon as possible. This includes providing multiple opportunities to identify migrants in vulnerable populations. Once enrolled, we provide individuals with a list of legal service providers, including information on low-cost or free legal services. We also care for the health and welfare of migrants, which includes providing COVID vaccinations for MPP enrollees. Additionally, if at any time MPP enrollee states that he or she has fear of persecution or torture on return to Mexico, that migrant is referred to a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services asylum officer for screening. CBP is committed to providing care and communicating rights to individuals throughout the MPP process. Third, it's important to recognize the interagency and international efforts in this area. CBP is one of many organizations involved in implementing PPP, and we must work effectively with all of our partners. DHS establishes guiding policies and parameters of MPP, and implementation is coordinated among multiple agencies. Within DHS, CBP works closely with USCIS and ICE. We also coordinate closely with the Department of Justice Executive Office for Immigration Review, the Department of State, and the Government of Mexico's National Institute of Migration. Clear and timely communication with non-governmental organizations is also a critical part of this partnering effort. Among other mandates, this administration has set a benchmark of allowing all MPP enrollees to have a hearing within 180 days. We work closely with our interagency colleagues, helps us take swift and decisive action to enroll migrants, facilitate hearings, and meet administration priorities. The border has always been a dynamic and complex environment. For CBP, we will continue to do our part in upholding the rule of law, ensuring individuals are properly cared for, and being a trusted partner to all other entities working on this effort. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman, for your testimony. I now recognize Ms. Madrala to summarize. Ms. Madrala to summarize your statement for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Higgins, Ranking Member Katko, and members of the Border Security Facilitation and Operations Subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. As Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs at the State Department, I am honored to have this opportunity to discuss the department's role in the implementation of the Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP. This year marks the bicentennial of bilateral relations between the United States and Mexico. Our two governments share deep commitments to humane and orderly migration, transnational security, and economic prosperity in the Western Hemisphere. The Biden-Harris administration has repeatedly stated that MPP has endemic flaws, imposes unjustifiable human costs, and pulls resources and personnel away from other priority efforts. As the appeals process continues, we are working closely with the government of Mexico in accordance with the court order requiring us to make good faith efforts toward re-implementing MPP. On December 2nd, 2021, the government of Mexico publicly announced its independent decision to accept individuals returned from the United States to Mexico under the re-implementation of MPP. The U.S. government announced measures to mitigate safety and protection risks to MPP enrollees, addressing humanitarian concerns also shared by the government of Mexico. The U.S. government leveraged the State Department's expertise supporting humanitarian programs to make available relevant support to MPP returnees in Mexico, as we do for other vulnerable migrants or asylum seekers. The department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, or PRM, supports ongoing programming through humanitarian partners in Mexico for shelter, legal orientation programs, psychosocial services, access to Wi-Fi, and other support for which all vulnerable migrants, including MPP enrollees, are eligible. The Department of State is also supporting access to COVID-19 testing for MPP migrants prior to arrival at a port of entry to re-enter the United States to attend court. In the previous implementation of MPP, some MPP enrollees were preyed upon by criminal groups upon re-entry to Mexico. To mitigate this risk, the State Department is supporting facilitation of humane transportation for MPP enrollees in Mexico between shelters and ports of entry. Our international organization partner provides this transport assistance. Return times are coordinated to minimize travel within Mexico after dark or before sunrise. the government of Mexico provides security escorts for transports to further minimize risks. In negotiations with Mexico, we arranged for a dignified and organized reception in Mexico, where Mexican authorities immediately provide MPP enrollees with documentation upon arrival that allows them to access local services and permission to work legally in the country. The Department of State, our international organization partners, provide assistance to ensure access to local services based on eligibility as determined by the government of Mexico. As we continue to work closely with the government of Mexico in accordance with the court order, the administration maintains that MPP contains endemic flaws, imposes unjustifiable human costs, and pulls resources and personnel away from other priority efforts. The United States and Mexico share an interest in sustainable solutions that humanely reduce irregular migration and forced displacement in, from, and through the region. This requires a comprehensive long-term approach that works to address the root causes of irregular migration and forced displacement while simultaneously enhancing collaborative regional approaches to expand access to international protection and other legal migration pathways, and to humanely manage unprecedented mixed migration flows through consistent border enforcement, visa regimes, and other tools. Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member, and members of the Border Security Facilitation and Operations Subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and I want to thank the witnesses, all of you, for your testimony. I will remind the subcommittee that we will each have 5 minutes to question the panel. I will start with myself, and then we will alternate. With the first question going to you, Mr. Huffman of CBP. Mr. Huffman, are migrants allowed to share information regarding the notice to appear and other MPP-related documents with advocates?
Yes, ma'am, they are. Through those advocates that have been recognized to represent them, certainly they can share their information.
Mm-hmm. Would a sitting member of Congress be allowed to photograph an individual's NTA if that individual grants permission?
So, ma'am, I think it's been a long-standing procedure for CBP and it has for years to protect the interest protecting the security and the privacy of migrants. When they're in our custody, in our care, they'll not allow them to be photographed or take those pictures as you described what happened to you the other day. And I regretted that you weren't satisfied with your interaction that day. But just to be clear, that's how we have always done it with folks that are in our custody or in our care, is to limit access to others outside, not certified to represent them in those cases.
Okay, Mr. Huffman, just so you're aware, this was not trying to take a picture of the migrant. This was the migrant trying to give me his information so I could follow up on the separation of him and his son, and was offering it to me. So I just, I think it's as a lawyer, when there's an attorney-client privilege, the privilege belongs to the client. And in this case, I think the privacy belongs to the migrant if they, want somebody to follow up, and I don't see the harm in doing that. And again, it was not a picture of the migrant. It was simply a picture of his notice to appear to get his information down. Okay, my second question goes to Mr. Nunez Neto. Would you say that this administration prioritizes keeping families together?
Yes, Chairwoman, DHS is committed to preserving family unity.
Okay. Now, I just want to remind you, like during my oversight trip, I met with the migrant who was, as I mentioned, illiterate and separated from his 23-year-old son, and it was enrolled in MPP. How does that align with the policy of keeping families together?
Thank you, Chairwoman, for that question. As you know, the definition of a family unit that DHS uses is based on the TVPRA definition of an unaccompanied child, and it basically notes that a parent or legal guardian traveling with a minor children is a family unit. Parents traveling together with adult children have traditionally not been treated as a family unit at the border. They've been treated as single adults. That said, we have directed CBP to ensure wherever possible that individuals who are traveling together and are subject to MPP should either be enrolled together or disenrolled together if they have familial ties. As Chief Huffman would likely point out, however, this can be pretty difficult to operationalize, in the border, depending on when and how people cross.
Okay, well, I want to just encourage you and the administration to rethink the family unit definition, and as you mentioned, trying to keep families together, and it was a little challenging to see a vulnerable elderly man being the one that was in MPP and separated. I just want to follow up to my second question as well. Can DHS or CBP, do you have the power to alter the guidelines on how to define a family?
Chairwoman, we are happy to work with you and the committee on what our current policies are, and maybe have a conversation around, what we can do to better reflect our shared concern about families being kept together.
Okay, I think my question was kind of just directed on who has the authority to change that definition. Is it DHS? Is it CBP? Is it somebody else?
On behalf of CBP, I don't believe we have the authority to change that definition. I think that's a policy issue. And then as the Mr. Nunez Nieto reflected, it is codified in the TV Trafficking Victims Protection Act as well. So that would be a policy level decision, perhaps even a legislative change. I'm not really sure.
Okay, my understanding is that DHS has the written guidance on MPP guidelines, and so it would be DHS, but we can, talk about that offline more. I want to move on to question. Well, with my time expiring here, with only 7 seconds left, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up, and just thank our witnesses for being here and your willingness to answer questions. As votes are going to be called around 20 minutes or so, so I want to make sure we give everybody ample time to get questions in as much as they can before they have to run to vote. And so with that, I will wrap up, and I will now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins. You're recognized for your 5 minutes.
I thank the chairwoman. Mr. Nunez Nieto, in your written testimony, you say that as of February 28th, a total of 1,602 individuals have been enrolled in MPP, and 893 of them have been returned to Mexico, while 181 are still being processed. That not all individuals who are enrolled in MPP are actually returned to Mexico, since some are disenrolled due to a particular vulnerability or positive determination of their non-refoulement interview. The numbers here seem very low. As a reference, from January 2019 through January 2021, nearly 70,000 individuals were enrolled in MPP. And the program was stopped, and now it allegedly is being reinstituted. And most Americans get the sense that as we reasonably assess this alleged good faith effort to reinstitute MPP as reflective of the court order, most Americans would reasonably assess that a good faith effort is being slow rolled at best, being resisted would perhaps be more accurate. Sir, do you support MPP as a policy, or do you oppose it?
Thank you, Ranking Member. As I've noted in my written testimony and oral statement, this administration opposes the MPP, but is committed to re-implementing it per the court order in good faith.
Thank you for that clarification. So, why would we expect DHS to legitimately comply with the court order in good faith when it's clear that DHS leadership opposes MPP as a policy? I think I mean, we expect compliance with the law. It means to fully comply with the law. It means to bring all your authority to bear on compliance with that law. That would be the definition of a good faith effort. But what we're seeing in these numbers are certainly translate to a lack of actual effort to comply. How long do you think it would take for MPP to be fully implemented? And in fact, what would the numbers need to be for you to say it's now fully re-implemented, given the fact that we're trending another 2 million plus illegal crossings this year? What would be a success? You say, how should America measure a good faith effort to re-implement MPP reflective of the court order that exists?
Thank you, Ranking Member. I would like to point out that the previous implementation of MPP took a number of months to ramp up and increase enrollments, and we are actually in line with their numbers for the first couple of months of implementation. That said, we are implementing MPP during a global pandemic, and the government of Mexico has required that individuals be tested and quarantined when they are returned to Mexico. That has limited to some extent our ability to enroll. We are hopeful that as the pandemic eases and restrictions begin to be raised, that we will be able to increase enrollments a little faster. We are committed to doing this in
let me
good
just,
faith, sir.
in the interest of time, let me just clarify that our understanding is that the illegal immigrants that are not returned to Mexico, that are released into the interior of America, are not tested for COVID. That's my understanding. They're distributed across the United States without that test. So I appreciate you pointing out that we're dealing with COVID. We're now well into the third year of 14 days to flatten the curve. So we're all very familiar with the barriers that COVID has presented. But the sanctity of our sovereign border is at stake. We are losing our nation at the southern border. Under MPP, Mr. Nunes-Neto, my final question. Please explain what happens to migrants who are specifically disenrolled in MPP when they do not appear in front of an immigration court as specified in their custody paperwork. What happens if they don't show up for court?
Sir, individuals who are disenrolled from the MPP would be processed under a different Title VIII pathway, and that could include expedited removal or some other authority. For individuals who are enrolled in MPP and who do not show up for their court hearing, some of that really depends on the immigration judge and the OPLA ICE attorney's determination, but we are already seeing some in absentia orders of removal being issued.
And that would be by ICE? You're saying they're being referred to ICE?
The gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, madam. Perhaps he can answer that final question.
Well, it stopped without even asking another question when I had 7 seconds left, because I want to make sure we get to the minorities witness as quickly as we can, because there's going to be a huge interruption with votes. And my concern is who will be engaged in returning.
Yes, ma'am. It was a yes no question, but I understand. I yield.
Okay, and the witness is welcome to, in his next question, answer the question if you'd like. The chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witness. As previously outlined, I will recognize members in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority. Members are reminded to unmute themselves when recognized for question. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here with us today. You have a difficult job. We all have a very challenging job. And I kind of agree with Mr. Higgins. We have, the numbers are probably very significant. But I do believe that we can protect our border and accept more refugees to the United States. After all, we are a country of immigrants. As part of my job here, being on Homeland, I try to go out and look at the field to see what you all are doing, what your challenges are. Last year, I went out to El Paso, Texas to address the refugee challenges there. And I remember I met the two young ladies, Yuri and Yoreli, the 3 and 5-year-old girls that had been thrown over the border by smugglers. And Mr. Huffman, if it wasn't for your smart and alert border officers, those young ladies would have perished out in the desert. So thank you and thank them. I met with Central American ambassadors in the past few months, and one of them was telling me that probably 80% of those refugees from his country, by the time they get to the United States border, 80% of the women are sexually violated, molested. It's an ugly road, but when you're hungry, when your life is threatened, you take risks. I wish I could say this thing's going to get better, but I took a tour out to Tijuana San Isidro border crossing about a month ago. And as I was crossing the border, I started up a conversation with a border patrol border agent, and he jokingly asked me if I knew Russian. And I asked him, I said, "What's your punchline, bro?" And he said, "You see those 20 vehicles in secondary inspection?" I said, "Yes, I do." He says, "They're full of Ukrainian and Russian immigrants. Their vehicles, and we've stopped them." My point to you is, given what's going on in Ukraine, given what's going on in other parts of the world, this problem is not going away. And we have to figure out, like Mr. Higgins said, how to protect our borders. But like I would say, how to open up our borders to refugees that we can accept and be part of our great country and our great society. And I concur with the chairperson. I've opposed the Remain in Mexico policy for a lot of reasons. And part of it is that I've seen that it doesn't work. I know President Biden ended this policy, but apparently now he's expanding it. So, without debating this a little bit, to the facts of the facts, without debating this, I would ask you, gentlemen and as witnesses, just help us come up with a solution here. Can we come up with ways to have these refugees possibly apply for refugee status in their home country? What can we do to keep them safe? It breaks my heart when I see human beings that look like my family, that look like my neighbors, be in such dire straits. Mr. Nunez Nieto, what do you think? What can we do? In the 2 minutes I have left.
Thank you for that question, sir. I agree wholeheartedly with you that there is more that needs to be done. As I noted in my opening statement, we haven't reformed our immigration system in decades. Our laws are simply outdated and have not kept up with the changes that we've seen at the border. We are seeing surges of migration happen.
I would probably say, sir, that our immigration laws have not changed and kept up with the reality of the world.
That's right.
Continue.
No, I agree completely, sir. And that is why I think, you've seen administrations of both parties move through executive action to make changes. I do not believe that's
very quickly. I'm sorry to cut you off. Mr. Huffman, like I mentioned to you, out in El Paso, your agents were excellent using that electronic infrared night stuff to patrol the borders. What can we do better in that respect?
So I appreciate you recognizing the acts of our agents. As I mentioned in my thing, I do believe we are the most humanitarian law enforcement agency in the country because of the circumstances we've been put into and we've been placed into that role. The reliance on that technology is great, and the support we get from Congress to allow us to increase our reliance on technology to give us greater situational what's going on around on the southwest border is huge, and those kind of things help us affect those type of rescues, plus help us secure the border and address the narcotic smuggling issue. All those things together, the technology and the personnel and the infrastructure are key to our success on the southwest border. In addition,
how much time do you have left, Madam Chair?
Thank you. Your time has expired. I was about to chime in as he was completing this.
Thank you very much.
His response. The gentleman yields. The
Yes.
chair recognized for 5 minutes the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Guest.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Nunez Neto, want to talk a few minutes and walk through a couple of things. It appears from your testimony, your written testimony, a brief history, that on February the 2nd, President Biden issued an executive order directing Secretary Mayorkas to review MPP. 5 months later, on June the 1st of 2021, Secretary Mayorkas concluded and issued a memorandum that the program should be terminated. Following that, there was a court challenge to that on August the 13th, 2021. The federal court from the Northern District of Texas ordered this program to continue or to be re-implemented. There was an appeal of that both to the Fifth Circuit and later to the Supreme Court, both of which were denied. You say there in your testimony, you say DHS is required to abide by the order to re-implement the program in good faith, and has continued to do so, demonstrating this administration's commitment to the rule of law. And so looking at recent border figures, in December of last year, the total number of encounters along the southwest border was 179,219 individuals. In January, that number dropped to 153,941. So taking the January figures for total numbers of encounters at 179,219, and then looking at the individuals from the statistics I have that were enrolled in that were enrolled in the program and actually returned to Mexico, I see only 191 individuals. And so if my math is correct, that would be less than 1/10 or almost right at 1/10 of 1% of every encounter that was returned to Mexico in December. Looking at January's figures, again in January, 153,941, and there were 212 that were returned in the initial program and another 42 in the post-reentry. Again, a staggering figure of barely over 1/10 of 1%. And so with figures that are so low that they barely register, it is difficult for me and other members on this committee for us to believe that you are acting in good faith to reinstitute this program. And I want to give you a brief opportunity to explain how those figures being so minuscule, how we can have faith that you are doing what you say you're doing, which is acting in good faith and following the law. Because that is what, as law enforcement officers, as the Department of Homeland Security, we're required to follow the law whether we like it or not. And you've been very clear. You don't like the law. You think it's bad law. You think it should go away. The Secretary thinks that. The President thinks that. The court has now ordered you to do that. And it seems to us that you're just saying, we don't care what the federal court says. We'll deport a handful of people, but it's less than 1/10 of 1%. And so please share with me, please convince me during these next couple of minutes as to how you and how the department is acting in good faith on a policy that you are very clear you don't like, you disagree with, and you wish you didn't have to apply.
Yeah, thank you, Representative. I'd like to point out just right off the bat that we are still implementing the CDC's Title 42 Public Health Authority at the border. And so in the month of January, as you noted, roughly half of the individuals we encountered of that number you cited were actually expelled under Title 42 and were not processed under Title 8 authorities. That said, as I noted in my previous answer, under the Trump administration, it took a few months for MPP to ramp up enrollments. It's a new program. It takes a while for us to get started. We are doing this during a pandemic, and Mexico has imposed some restrictions on how we can return people, including when and the kind of testing and quarantine that needs to be available on the Mexican side for them to accept people. So we are committed to increasing enrollments. We're working with DOJ to add immigration judges and courtrooms. We're working internally to streamline our processes. We have been expanding across the border and just started in Laredo, Texas this week. So, sir, with all due respect, we are implementing in good faith and committed to continuing to expand enrollments in the coming months.
Well, thank you. Very quickly, Mr. Huffman, thank you first for your service. I want to ask if you agree with this statement. The director of the Arizona Department of Homeland Security, who is in our second panel, made this statement: when applied properly, MPP helps protect the lives of every Arizona communities and those throughout the nation. With MPP, law enforcement spends less time chasing the same traffickers, smugglers, and coyotes, and more time protecting Arizona and America. Do you agree with that statement?
So again, thank you for the question and the opportunity to respond to that. I haven't heard the statement previously, but as I think even the secretary recognized, there was some success with the MPP of reducing flows across the southwest border. Although there was a lot of other things going on at the same time to understand how if MPP was really, I don't say pressure tested under the circumstances we have now. But as my colleague from DHS said, we're committed to implementing in good faith as best we can. We continue to find efficiencies all at the border to make it work better and faster. One of the challenges is it involves the synchronization of many organizations outside of just CBP and DHS to make it work. To reconstruct that and get it in place is taking a little bit of time, but it is consistent with the number if you measure against the same time from the same time period last time to this time, so far the numbers are pretty consistent. We hope to ramp up as we increase, as you mentioned, the availability for courts, but we're working hard to get there as fast as we can.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes for 5 minutes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Nunez-Neto, I noticed that in your testimony began, Mr. Guest followed up, and Ms. Mandrala's testimony also began with making clear that that you disapproved the policy behind MPP. Do you, of what relevance is that? You would agree with me, wouldn't you, that if you've got an obligation under law, that you have to perform the obligation under law without regard to whether you like it or not? Isn't that true?
That is true, sir. And we are, as I've noted, complying in good faith with the court order, and we believe very much in the rule of law.
Yeah, but you didn't answer my question. Of what relevance is it, and why do you start off your statement by making clear that you disapprove the law that you're required by court to follow?
We disapprove of this program, and the president and the secretary have made quite clear that MPP is not aligned with this administration's values and actually distracts from some of the important priorities that we have that we believe will have a similar effect on reducing border flow, sir.
So now you've repeated your preference, but again, my question is, you're supposed to be carrying out the law. The Constitution requires you faithfully to execute the law. So my question is not why you believe, not why your preferences are what your preferences are, but why do you start your testimony before this committee concerning compliance with MPP, compliance with the court's order? Why do you begin it by telling us what your preferences are?
Sir, we believe the law supports our position that the secretary has the authority to terminate MPP, and we are committed to fighting the court's order all the way up to the Supreme Court if needed. And have done so already and will continue to do so, and are looking forward to the arguments before the Supreme Court, which will happen in April.
Would it be, but that doesn't change the fact of what your legal duty is now, does it, sir? You're under obligation by order of a court. In fact, the United States Supreme Court has declined to grant a stay from that order, right?
That is correct, sir, and that is why we have moved forward with implementation and are re-implementing in good faith with the court's order.
Would it be possible to sabotage a policy with which you disagree, even while professing that you are proceeding in good faith to execute it?
All I can say to that, sir, is that we are committed to implementing in good faith. We have worked round the clock, many thousands of hours across the U.S. government to re-implement this program that we disagree with, and we are committed to continuing to comply in good faith and continue to increase enrollments even as we fight this court order.
And yet we have the sheer data that indicates that given the level of illegal migration at the border, almost none of the persons being encountered are being put into MPP. Mr. Huffman, I'd like to ask you, I noted that the as being implemented, if there's people will be disqualified from MPP or not put into MPP if they have a physical or mental issue or some other disability, but a physical or mental issue, what would prevent lawyers that are furnished to prospective enrollees from coaching them to say that they're depressed or have anxiety? Would that then, if they then repeated that to a CBP agent, would that keep them from going into MPP?
Certainly. Thank you for the question and for that. So not really having privy to what their consultation with the attorneys are, but certainly that people have been enrolled and then disenrolled when vulnerabilities were found out at a later time. How they arrived at those vulnerabilities or how they became, I don't really have insight into, but the scenario you described, I guess is certainly possible.
So well, then what are the prophylactic devices or prophylactic measures to make sure you're not susceptible to just fraudulent manufacturing of evidence or indications like that to keep somebody from being enrolled in MPP?
Sir, we try to focus on those when we're deciding who's going to be the best suitable candidate to be enrolled into the program, would be least likely to have any vulnerabilities that would show up at a later date. Because for us to enroll someone and then have to disenroll them it takes time, operational time away from the work. So we focus on those that we're confident we have a high likelihood to get through the program and not become vulnerable or declared vulnerable at a later date.
So I don't hear any protection for that whatsoever, which to me, it sort of gives the lie to the entire notion of a good faith compliance. If you start off your statement by saying you don't want to, you despise the program, you note your obligatory obligation to to execute in good faith, and just pose one notion to the courageous CBP right there. And there's no defense for that. You can just evade it at will. And that's what I think is happening. So I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde. You're now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Okay, this question I have is for Ms. Mendrala. Thank you for your testimony, ma'am. Twice in your statement, you say the Biden-Harris administration has repeatedly stated that MPP has endemic flaws, imposes unjustifiable human costs, and pulls resources and personnel away from other priorities. Now, can you justify that statement for me? I mean, do you support it? First off, do you support MPP?
Thank you for the question, sir. As my colleague from DHS recently stated, the administration has repeated. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
I've got you now.
Okay, as my colleague from DHS has repeatedly said, the administration has stated on several occasions that that it does disagree with the policy of MPP, but is nevertheless committed to the rule of law and to implement in good faith the court order to re-implement MPP.
Okay, but you say it has endemic flaws, imposes unjustifiable human costs. All right, I mean, I'm not seeing unjustifiable human costs. I'm not seeing endemic flaws in the MPP. In fact, I think it is a vital program that is both fair and necessary. The MPP is the law of the land, and the courts have rightly ordered DHS to implement it. So that's what DHS needs to be doing, and doing it wholeheartedly. The purpose of the MPP is to ensure people that are coming illegally across our border stay in Mexico, those who have that desire and that request for asylum, that they stay outside our country so that they don't just forget to show up for their asylum hearing and end up in our country as an illegal immigrant. So I think it's a very important program. I think that the administration is way off base in fighting this program. Obviously, it is the law, it's legal, it's fair, it's humane. All right. I don't believe the court would have ordered it to be implemented if it imposed unjustifiable human costs. I think that's totally inappropriate or had endemic flaws. My next question for you, in your testimony, you say state PRM is supporting facilitation of human transportation for MPP enrollees in Mexico between shelters and ports of entry. Our international organization partner provides this transportation assistance. So who pays for this? Are there tax dollars involved?
Yes, sir. It's funded by the Department of State through our Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration.
Okay, so there are tax dollars involved here. All right, so what you're saying then is you're paying for transportation in another country, in Mexico, to bring these people from wherever they are to the port of entry. You know, they got to the border by themselves the first time they showed up. And now here we are paying, using taxpayer dollars to bring them for wherever they are in Mexico back to the border for their hearing. Now, what is your obligation under the law to provide that transportation?
So the court ordered us to re-implement in good faith MPP and do so recognizing that the government of Mexico is a party to that agreement. Over the course of several months, we negotiated with the government of Mexico the terms of re-implementing MPP. The government of Mexico had several concerns with the prior iteration of MPP implementation, humanitarian concerns with which we agreed. And one of the concerns was that individuals returned under MPP fell victim oftentimes to criminal organizations upon their return. And so we took several steps in concert with the government of Mexico to improve the humanitarian conditions for those MPP enrollees in Mexico.
So what you're saying then is that without the United States paying that transportation, that MPP probably would not have been negotiated between Mexico and the United States. Is that right?
We negotiated several aspects of humanitarian treatment of MPP enrollees in Mexico, and security concerns were at the top of that list. Mexico is also providing security accompaniment to those transportation routes to and from ports of entry. The Department of State is also working with international organization partners to facilitate shelter, to improve Wi-Fi access at shelter so individuals can have access to counsel while in Mexico, and other services as well.
You know, I wish we treated our United States citizens that well. I just don't see it. And I just don't see treating folks who have broken the law as they have done here and giving them all these benefits. Is all that does is encourage more people and more people and more people to illegally enter this country. And that's a disgrace. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. And given that votes have not been called, we are going to take this opportunity to close out the first panel. I just want to remind all our viewers that it is not illegal to head to America, to go to the border and apply for asylum and seek asylum. Unfortunately, the opportunity to present yourself at the border to do that is not happening. We need to get back to that, and maybe that will help having people come between ports of entry, which is what we're talking about here today. So I want to thank the panelists on the first panel for being here, for appearing, for your testimony. You are now excused.
Madam Chair, point of clarification on your comment, please.
Yes, sir.
We are talking about people here that are not arriving at a port of entry. We're talking about people here who are illegally crossing the border between ports of entry.
Mr. Clyde, that's exactly my point. My point is that
that is illegal.
My point is that people are coming between ports of entry because right now the border is closed and not allowing people to legally come and present themselves at a port of entry to claim asylum, which has been the law and the process. So that's what I was pointing out. So you and I are kind of on the same page, just we're saying it differently. And I want to move on to our second panelist because it's a guest of our ranking member here. I want to make sure he has an opportunity to ask questions of his guests. So thank you, Mr. Clyde. The first panel is now excused. Thank you again for appearing. I now welcome our second panel. Mr. Tim Romer is the director of the Arizona Department of Homeland Security for the state of Arizona. Without objection, the witness's full statement will be inserted in the record. I now ask Mr. Romer So I now asked Mr. Romer's witness, our witness, to summarize his statement for 5 minutes. You are now recognized.
Chairwoman Barragan, Ranking Member Higgins, and distinguished members of the committee, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'd like to summarize my statement for the record by focusing my opening remarks on Arizona's support for border security and how the border crisis in our home state affects the rest of the nation from a national security, public safety, and humanitarian perspective. I'd like to first start by thanking the brave men and women of CBP and all law enforcement on the front lines of the border that work tirelessly to protect our state and nation day and night. Their efforts are sincerely appreciated, and we must come together to do more from a policy and legislative perspective to support their efforts. The dedication of these brave men and women along the border is what stands in the way of dangerous criminals re-entering the country, many with previous convictions of violent crime within the United States, the seizure of deadly drugs on their way into our communities across the nation, and the rescue of migrants struggling to make it safely into our country. This past year, we saw many records being broken, and it's heartbreaking to watch, knowing all too well that many were avoidable with stronger action. From a record-breaking number of drug overdose deaths to a record number of migrant deaths, our border has become increasingly deadly. The migrant protection protocols are a thoughtful policy that protects migrants looking to the United States of America for a better life. We need strong, lasting, and consistent application of not just MPP, but also immediate action on the part of the federal government to protect our communities, both on the border and throughout the nation. This isn't just a matter of border security, it's a matter of national security and public safety. In Arizona, we are on the front lines and the front door to this national crisis. Our border communities, cities, towns, sheriffs, police chiefs, and healthcare facilities are on the front lines of this national emergency. And they are the first to suffer from border policy that is not well reasoned. Dangerous and deadly drugs, human smuggling, and cartel actions thrive off of an unsecured border and patchwork enforcement of even helpful policies. An unsecured southern border creates a public safety crisis, not just in Arizona, but across local, state, tribal, and federal jurisdictions throughout the country. When applied properly, MPP helps protect the lives of every Arizona community and those throughout the nation. Consistent application of strong border security policies, including MPP, gives federal law enforcement authorities the ability to stop the individuals who are taking advantage of the asylum system and allows the system to work better for those in need. MPP allows authorities to take significant action as opposed to the catch and release tactics from the past that are sadly becoming all too real again today. With MPP, law enforcement spends less time chasing the same trafficker, smuggler, and coyotes and more time proactively and effectively protecting Arizona and America from dangerous drugs and transnational criminal organizations who continue to profit off of vulnerable populations. In an operation just this December, Arizona DPS seized over 664 pounds of methamphetamine and 37 pounds of fentanyl. These drugs were being transported from southern Arizona towards Phoenix, and the street value of these drugs seized in just this one operation was $5.1 million. As Governor Ducey has said, drugs are slipping through the cracks and into the bloodstream of our communities. The cartels are using America as a business venture and are continuing to capitalize on federal policies and an insecure border. Arizona ranchers, farmers, law enforcement, victim services, nonprofit organizations, and community members, our officials, and our state officials are impacted by MPP. MPP and border security is not an immigration issue, but a humanitarian issue. Humans are treated as transnational items by transnational criminal organizations, and having patchwork mismanaged the border security policy is not only insufficient, but irresponsible. The cartels continue to profit billions of dollars off of human smuggling, and MPP is a critical tool to keep migrants safe. In closing, Arizona has done and continues to do everything within our legal authority to provide law enforcement and communities with the resources they need to protect our border. And while border security is not a simple problem to solve, we need to come together to find these solutions. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Romer, for your testimony. As Mr. Romer is Ranking Member Higginson's witness, I will start by recognizing him for questions. The chair will now recognize Mr. Higgins, the Ranking Member, for 5 minutes.
I thank our chairwoman. Mr. Romer, thank you for being here today to speak on behalf of the challenges our nation faces at the southern border. Your perspective from the state of Arizona and with your official duties gives you an excellent view to the realities that face our nation. Yeah, may I ask you to talk about the policies of the Biden administration and how they're affecting your state? For instance, can you talk about MPP and whether fully implementing, re-implementing MPP would make a significant difference in dealing with the surge, and how your perspective of that relates to the kind of anemic numbers that we're seeing from this alleged good faith effort out of the administration?
Well, thank you, Ranking Member Higgins, for your question. I believe if we just look at the metrics and the data on this issue, the answer is there for us, which is that MPP was implemented in 2019. If you look at 2019 and 2020 metrics of southwest border apprehensions, and you combine those 2 years combined, it still is not anywhere near the number of apprehensions we saw on our southwest border just last year in FY21. That proves to me that MPP, when implemented and used effectively, does work. It does allow our Border Patrol and law enforcement on the border to spend more time out there in law enforcement actions and less time of the processing, which does make us safer. When they are out there doing proactive work is when our nation and our state are at our strongest. But when they're just tied up doing processing at the sheer numbers that we've seen, it puts them in a difficult position, and it affects all of our communities around the nation.
Do you see the criminal network responding proactively, being very aware to the absence of regular patrol and law enforcement on the border when those law enforcement personnel have been pulled to processing duties? You're seeing that the cartel recognizes that and knows that and ramps up their own actions?
Yes, Ranking Member Higgins, absolutely. Unfortunately for us, the cartels are very good at the business side of this. They're very well versed and experienced. And what they do is they use a couple of different techniques to allow migrants to go over the border in certain numbers to pull resources. And then they use that opening to either bring in dangerous narcotics and dangerous drugs into our communities, or they use that time to use the dangerous individuals. So we have seen them using that tactic. The DPS operation I noted in my remarks was in partnership with local law enforcement and Governor Ducey's directive to do more to secure our state and our nation. We surged DPS and the National Guard to a portion of the border east of Yuma, and we were able to quickly seize massive amounts of drugs. We're well over 500 pounds in that operation that were coming into the nation. And we know, based on our own intelligence, that what was happening is the cartels were sending the big groups through San Luis and Yuma to tie up law enforcement while they then ran the dangerous drugs or dangerous individuals to the east.
Exactly. Finally, sir, because we're going to try and move quickly here, and I thank the chairwoman for allowing us to do so. In my remaining 45 seconds here, can you describe to the committee just what you see on the ground in Arizona from your local communities? How are your local communities feeling the impact of this unprecedented illegal crossing at our southern border and criminal activity?
Ranking Member Higgins, they're frustrated, and many are. And we saw the mayor of Yuma, Arizona, declare an emergency based on the high numbers that are coming through Yuma sector. And so they are extremely frustrated. They see the impacts that it's having on their healthcare facilities, on their hospitals, on their law enforcement's ability to respond to emergencies. And they share that with us directly. And the governor is listening to those local leaders and local law enforcement. And that's why we're surging resources to the border to help protect the state and the nation.
Thank you, sir, for your candid answers today and for being here. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member Higgins. The chair will now recognize other members for questions they may wish to ask the witness. As previously outlined, I will recognize members in order of seniority, alternating. Well, I'm not going to alternate between majority and minority. I'm going to give the preference to the minority since this is a minority witness, and I'm going to skip myself and just wait for my comments given that votes have been called. So I will go after Mr. Bishop and Mr. Clyde go as I'm just closing out remarks. So with that said, in order to get to my colleagues here, the chair will recognize for 5 minutes the gentleman. Let me just check to see who I have on here. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, you're up first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Romer, I'm sorry you weren't together with the previous panel. Did you get a chance to hear the interactions and the testimony from the previous panel?
Yes, sir, I did. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Mr. Correa, who's now no longer on the screen, I don't think, very admirably and candidly described the suffering and the inhumanity that has resulted from in no way stanching the flow of this 2 million illegal immigrants into the United States. And even if, you know, not all 2 million are being released in the United States, rootless and so forth, the suffering that Mr. Correa correctly described from everything I hear is, you know, 80% of females being raped, young girls being raped. He talked about the young girls being dropped off from the wall that the nation saw and was shocked by. This is happening every day. And I just wonder, I've never heard Mr. Nunez Neto, despite repeated testimony before the committee or subcommittee or any other Biden administration witness, ever express a personal preference or a concern about the inhumanity to which millions now of migrants are being subjected by having this uncontrolled southern border. I just wonder, sir, in your experience, are you aware of any logic that would, by which one who is purportedly concerned with inhumanity allegedly visited upon people who are enrolled in MPP by not having Wi-Fi or lawyers or transportation, how that would possibly be seen as justifying discontinuing MPP when the result is to have this unbelievably unconstrained flow of migrants who are suffering all the other inhumanity that Mr. Correa described? Do you perceive any logic that explains that?
Well, Congressman Bishop, I thank you for the question. And, you know, really, I applaud, you know, all members of Congress for their important, work on this issue from a humanitarian crisis. Sure, absolutely. With all due respect, I completely understand the humanitarian concerns. It is something that's there. However, with that said, MPP, when implemented properly, does actually protect the individuals coming into the nation. What I've seen on the ground is that the drug cartels and transnational criminal organizations are ruthless criminals. And we need every tool implemented to the full extent of the law to combat these criminals. We see it, you know, day in and day out. And I think MPP, based on the metrics I cited previously, does work. I'll give you a quick statistic. If you look at CBP data on the dangerous individuals that have been caught coming across the border, and you look at FY21, there were 60 individuals arrested with a previous conviction for homicide or manslaughter. That's 60 just in FY21 alone. I went back and I tallied up the previous 5 years on that topic, and I counted 19. So 19 in the previous 5 years with a previous homicide or manslaughter conviction, and 60 in FY21. Already in this next fiscal year, we've seen 22 so far this year. And then in addition to that, in the publicly available data, I see 1,178 that had previous assault charges and 488 with sexual offenses. So my point with the statistics is that what we're seeing is these dangerous transnational criminal organizations are not just bringing in dangerous drugs through the border, they're bringing in dangerous individuals as well. Policies like MPP allow law enforcement to get back to their law enforcement duties and not be caught up in processing. And that's what I see on the ground as having a significant impact on this important issue.
Well, I thank you for those comments. They're extraordinarily cogent. And it continues to elude me why members of the majority on this committee and DHS under the Biden administration is pleased or satisfied to see the United States government become the logistics arm for the Mexican cartels, and yet expresses no end of remorse rather than viewing it as an opportunity to implement MPP in a manner that's consistent with all the humanitarian concerns that they are troubled by. But that, unfortunately, is not what we're seeing. I appreciate your testimony very much, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. I will save my 5 minutes in my remarks until after the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Clyde, is recognized. Mr. Clyde, you're recognized for 5 minutes, given that votes have been called, and I want to make sure you get your 5 minutes of time in.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Green, are you aware of any legal ports of entry that are closed?
No, sir, I'm not.
Okay, all right. I didn't think so. I didn't think there were any legal ports of entry that were closed. So there should be no reason that an illegal or that an immigrant who wants to come here under a case of asylum couldn't go to a legal port of entry. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's my understanding.
Okay, all right. So let me ask you another question about MPP. Obviously, you know, the Trump administration was the one who implemented it. And then on February 5th, 2021, President Biden issued Executive Order 14010 to suspend it. And then he had Secretary Mayorkas review it. And then on June 1st, 2021, Secretary Mayorkas determined that MPP should be terminated and issued a memorandum on that effect, or to that effect. Less than 2.5 months later, the U.S. District Court in Northern Texas determined that that was not legal, and the Secretary was not in compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act, and ordered the DHS in good faith to re-implement the MPP program. So there's already a roadway for the implementation of the MPP program, and it had only been just a few months since it was officially terminated before it was ordered to be reinstituted. So how long do you think it should have taken, or should it have taken, to re-implement this particular program that had only been shut off literally for 2.5 months?
Well, sir, I think it should have been implemented, re-implemented immediately, because the statistics show that it works. And so I will also note that, per my previous comments about the cartels, what they're doing is they are controlling who comes across the border. Our best estimates is that the transnational criminal organizations charge between $5,000 and $10,000 per person to come across the border. In Arizona last fiscal year, we had about 305,000 apprehensions that we know about of people coming across the border. If we do the math and we say $10,000 a person at over 300,000 people coming in across the border, that doesn't even account for the recidivism rate or the getaways. We're looking somewhere in the ballpark of these transnational criminal organizations profiting approximately $3 billion on human smuggling alone. Those figures are what fuel their pockets in the drugs to then be trafficked and smuggled into the United States. So they're using the human smuggling side to fuel other dangerous criminal enterprises. And that's really what's considered most significant and of concern to us on the ground. And that's why we've seen the governor take significant action.
And those are absolutely terrible statistics. Imagine if if our government, basically that's exactly what's happening. Our government is funding these criminal organizations, these cartels, through allowing illegal immigration to occur to the tune of $3 billion. It's stunning. You know, we as a government have to do better. I don't think that we are actually helping the immigrant at all by allowing them to come illegally when the legal ports of entry are truly open. With that, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions. I am now going to yield myself and recognize myself for 5 minutes. And we'll start the clock now. I almost don't know where to begin. I'm not sure I can get through in 5 minutes to respond to the slew of inaccurate information that has been put out there. Mr. Romer, you mentioned that you are relying on statistics, and then you cite to criminals, and when we're talking here about MPP. So let me begin to help you get an understanding of why the statistics that you're providing are not apples to apples and why they're inaccurate. First of all, you're talking about 2019 numbers, and you're comparing 2019 numbers. I just remind you, there was something called the pandemic and COVID, and borders were shut down between here and Central America starting in March of 2020. People were unable to leave their country, and the administration started putting people into Title 42. They were turning people away because of COVID, and they were using Title 42 and not putting them into MPP. So if you want to take the statistics and data from 2019 and start comparing them when you still have the implementation, by the way, of Title 42, something I don't even agree with, then it's not accurate to rely on those statistics and to make those comparisons. So it bothers me to kind of hear these comparisons being made without the explanation of why more people were not put into MPP. That's because they were put into Title 42, and comparing years where you had a pandemic and COVID. Now, that's one of the reasons why I think when you talk about the number of apprehensions at the border don't equal in 2019 and 2020 what they are in 2021, that you just can't make that, because we still have Title 42 where people are still being put in there and being turned away. The other thing is that you went on to mention at great length information about criminals and the concerns of people's records. Migrants with a criminal history cannot be enrolled in an MPP. That is true now. That is true under Trump. This program is not intended to deter criminals. And so that is, I really don't see the relevance other than the continuation of folks on the other side who don't believe in the values that I believe on immigration, into trying to criminalize migrants who are fleeing violence in their home countries and coming over. In America, it's completely legal to head to America and to present yourself at a port of entry to claim asylum. Now, we've heard repeatedly that the ports of entry are open. You were even asked this question, whether ports of entry were open. Ports of entry are only open to those traveling with travel documents. Ports of entry are not open for migrants to come and present themselves and present their claim of fear to get into the system to claim asylum. That is not happening. And Mr. Romer, if you're not aware of this, I'm going to make an offer to take you to the border so that you can see how people cannot do it. I've done it before. I have traveled with these groups. I've seen firsthand people that are being turned away at the border who are trying to present themselves legally. It's not allowed. It's not being allowed. Okay? So this notion that the ports of entry are open, this notion that the border is open, is completely false. It's open to Americans. It's open to people who have documents, but it's not open. And that is one reason that I and immigration advocates are calling for immigration reform and are calling for this administration to eliminate Title 42 and to get back to the process of what is legal in this country. And what is legal in this country is I am here to apply for asylum to get into the system and to be allowed to be admitted into this country pending their court hearing. That's not happening. That is not happening. Okay. So again, I just had to make sure that I took this opportunity to do that because, this division on immigration is often based on misinformation and people who take facts and distort them. And it's just very troubling. And so with that, I don't really have any questions for you, Mr. Romer. I wanted to take my 5 minutes. I wasn't even going to use my 5 minutes, but after the line of questioning and what I was hearing, I had to take the opportunity to make sure to correct A, the record, and B, what I have been seeing at the border and what I know to be the case. And so I want to take this opportunity to close out our second panel. I want to thank the witnesses for their testimony. The testimony has been valuable, and I appreciate the panelists on the first panel and the second panel. And I want to thank the members for their questions. Without objection, I want to submit statements for the record from the Women's Refugee Commission, the Human Rights First, the Hope Border Institute Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, and the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond expeditiously in writing. The chair reminds members that the committee record remains open for 10 days, and without objection, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you.